Thank you very much, and it's a privilege and honor to rise tonight in this House of Commons, perhaps on the last day of this cohort of Parliament here. So I'd like to start by saying that I will be splitting my time with the fabulous member from Renfrew, Nipissing, Pembroke, who was first elected in the year 2000 when she was 12 years old, the youngest parliamentarian in Canadian history. So thank you very much, and like I said, an honor and privilege to serve and also to talk to this motion today. Of course, this is our motion, the Conservative Party motion, and I must say it's a very reasonable motion. I'm hoping that we'll get unanimous support across the aisle for that. It raises such concepts as the fact that we need to have a balanced budget. In fact, it doesn't even say that we're committing to a balanced budget. We're asking this government merely for a plan to get to a balanced budget. And as my colleague from Manitoba said just earlier, it's something actually that the Liberal government had in their plans just less than 9 months ago. In their fall economic statement, they actually called for a balanced budget in 2027 to 28. And much has changed since then, including $60 billion in new spending, an increase in uptake in the debt to GDP ratio, despite the fact that the finance minister said just 6 months ago or so, or 9 months maybe, is that we would not see an increase in the debt to GDP ratio. This is a line we will not cross. Well, the line was crossed, and now the trajectory is for the debt to GDP ratio to go up. We talk about in our motion the fact that the IMF has warned that Canada has the most risk of a massive mortgage default. That's just fact. I'm sure everyone can agree to that. The average mortgage payments are up 122% since this Prime Minister took office. Once again, that's just fact. It's just saying that the grass is green, the sky is blue. And that Canadian households have most debt as a share of GDP of any country in GDP, or in the G7. Once again, that is just fact, and like I said, I'm hopeful that we'll get unanimous support for our motion, and all we are calling upon, we're not even saying that this government needs to balance the budget. We're asking for a plan to balance that budget. But let me explain to you a little bit and give you some context as to why this government may not support this. When we look at balancing a budget for a government, it's really in the high-level terms not much different than balancing the budget for a household or for a business. You've got revenue on one side and expenses on the other. So I'm going to start out talking about revenue and the struggles that this government is no doubt having, and why, part of the reason why they may not be able to get to a balanced budget. We actually are facing, in accordance to Philip Cross, former lead statistician for the Government of Canada, for Statistics Canada, and according to him, we are facing the lowest economic growth over the last decade that we've had since the Great Depression, since the 1930s, in other words. That's 0.8 per capita percent over the last 10 years. That's basically stagnant or no growth over the last 10 years. That's a fraction of what it would be in the United States, a fraction of what it would be in Switzerland, a fraction of what it would be in Ireland. And so we are an outlier in terms of our poor economic growth per capita. It's true that if you look at the entire GDP of the country, it's a little bit more of a positive note, but that's simply because we've had high levels of immigration. And so it's not really a great thing to say that we are of course bringing in newcomers, which is fantastic, but we are not actually increasing the GDP per capita. We're having newcomers come in, and unfortunately having struggles economic. They cannot find housing. Of course, we've had the recent immigration scandal with the students, and we need to be much more accommodating and welcoming to our newcomers, in my opinion, but that's a digression. The reality is that the per capita GDP is at 0.8 over the last 10 years. That's the lowest in the G7, the lowest in the OECD, and it's an absolutely abysmal number. So then we go to, okay, well why is revenue so low on the government side? Why are we not getting that economic growth? Well, there's some policy reasons for that. One is that our productivity is amongst the lowest in the OECD and amongst the lowest in the G7. Productivity is measured in contribution per worker per hour to GDP. If we look at Switzerland, they're at 55. If we look in the United States, they're at 65. This is 2018 numbers. You can source this. And if you look at Ireland, they're at 84. These are countries without our land, without our incredible resources, and most notably, I believe we have the hardest working, most well-educated, smartest people in the world here in Canada. And yet we have a lower productivity than most of the advanced economies. We are, to finish my story, at $50. Now, there is a notable exception to that in Canada. We do have one sector of our economy that is just absolutely blowing out the roof, doing fabulous. And that is actually our energy sector. That is well over $500 per hour, 10 times as much as the average. And what is this government doing? They're trying to eliminate Canadian energy. Well, I can tell you, Madam Speaker, if our productivity numbers don't look good now, and they don't, in the absence of our energy sector, we will be in deep trouble. Our prosperity as a country will be put in jeopardy. So we have that productivity issue, and then we look under the hood. Well, what's creating that productivity? Well, there's a problem. There's a number of issues. One is we are forecasted to have the lowest capital investment in the OECD over the next 20 years, I believe it is. Once again, all the numbers that I'm going to say are completely sourceable and can be cited. And so what that's doing is that when you don't have capital that comes into the country to refurbish machines and factories, to build new buildings, to create new infrastructure, is that infrastructure, those equipment, that buildings, they all get out of date, and that reduces your competitiveness. You can imagine if you've got a machine in a factory that was built in 2023 and you're competing against another factory that has machinery that was built in 1960, obviously the one built in 2023 is going to have a huge event. And this government is pushing away capital. And how are they doing that? Well, they're adding uncertainty. So just in their most recent budget alone, they had 2 provisions for retroactive taxation. Retroactive taxation is going back in time and saying, remember how we told you your bill was X? Well, no, we're changing that. We're changing it to Y. That's something you see in unadvanced economies, something that you see in very poor economic performance. That's something, quite frankly, you see in authoritarian regimes. You can't just go back in time and change what the bill was on the customer, in this case, the taxpayer. And so we're pushing away that capital. Another significant issue which is undermining our productivity numbers is our innovation framework. So our innovation framework in Canada is amongst the worst in the G7, amongst the worst in the OECD. Canadians are producing great ideas, and I say that to differentiate. I say ideas instead of intellectual property, because our ideas are not becoming intellectual property, because we don't have the appropriate government regulation and framework in place to capture those ideas and make sure that Canadians have prosperity from them. What's actually happening today, unfortunately, is that our universities, our young people, our innovators, our entrepreneurs are coming up with amazing ideas. And you know what? Those ideas are actually becoming commercial successes. The trouble is, not in Canada. So they're becoming successes in the United States of America. They're becoming successes in Ireland. They're becoming successes around the world, but not here in Canada, because we don't have the government framework to capture those ideas, to put in place the conditions precedent to make sure that we exploit fully those resources. And so what's happened is our ideas go offshore. They manufacture products, they create services, and with no money to the Canadian public, and then they're sold back to us at an incredibly high price. And so we get hurt both ways. I could go on, and I wish I had another 20 minutes to talk here, but I've only got a minute left, and I've only talked a little bit about the revenue side, but I'll talk briefly about the expense side. This Prime Minister came into office saying that he would balance the budget within a couple of years. We never saw that budget get balanced. We saw in the fall economic statement that there was a plan to balance the budget, yet we see no balance in sight now, according to the budget. When you have a government that is sucking the oxygen out of the economy, that is pulling the fuel from the economy and taking it out, you are slowing down the private sector, which is leading to a productivity crisis in Canada, which is putting the prosperity of our nation at risk. We need a country, we need a leader, we need a government that will balance our budgets, bring turn hurt into hope. For your home, my home, our home, let's bring it home.